Hi. So welcome to Sweden. I'm here to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, every nerd's fantasy come true. I'm here to talk about specifically reparative play in Dungeons and Dragons. This is a concept that I have been heralding for the past 3 years now alone. But before I get into the details of what exactly that is, I have to set the stage. So as queer identities continue to be marginalized in contemporary culture, the spaces for queer discourse remain limited. This particular snapshot is from a scene from an episode of Disney's The Owl House. Now, I don't know if anyone's familiar with The Owl House, but this scene was the first kind of depiction of the queer character, Amity and Les, the queer characters, Amity and Les. They are a gay couple that appeared in the show, and after the broadcast of this episode, Disney announced that there would not be a fourth season of this show. So make of that what you will. Either way, it does not look good. This is the main example I tell people to show them the limited capability members of the queer community have to accurately represent ourselves in mainstream media. That being the case, luckily for us, there is room in other narratives that we get to carve out our own spaces into. This particular observation has come to be known as reparative play. Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick first proposed the idea of reparative play in the mid-90s. And basically at its core, I said reparative play. I meant reparative reading. Reparative reading is placing focus on a positive framing of the story with the intention of constructing a more optimistic view for queer future. A reparative reading of a story focuses not on the exposure of political outrages that we already know about, but more so how to create a sustainable life for queer members and to rebuild a belief in our future. For the queer community, reparative reading is a frame through which we can see and access progressive representation, which positively frames our values within pre-existing narratives. So at the very base, we see this all the time with like shipping, queer shipping of maybe Sherlock Holmes and John Watson as more than just roommates, or Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, or Sherlock Holmes and the head detective, a lot of Sherlock. But Sedgwick gives us her specific reparative reading from In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust, talking about how the story and the joy and the truths that the narrator comes across would not have been possible with a heterotypical family. She says, the narrator, after a long withdrawal from society, goes to a party where he at first thinks everyone is sporting elaborate costumes, pretending to be ancient, then realizes that they are old, and so is he, and is then assailed in half a dozen mnemonic shocks by a climactic series of joy-inducing truths about the relation of writing to time. The narrator never says so, but isn't it worth pointing out that the complete temporal disorientation that initiates him into this revelatory space would have been impossible in the heterosexual père de famille, in one who had meanwhile been embodying in the form of inexorably progressing identities and roles the regular arrival of children and grandchildren. This reparative reading reframes the heterotypical family as restrictive and favors an alternative to this heteronormative value. Similarly, the reparative reading of queer characters in ideal situations allows us to see changes that we can make to our own lives in order to bring these ideals to fruition. So now I get to reparative play. Thank you for your patience. We can observe that reparative play has similar aspects as a frame of interpretation, same as reparative reading. The main difference is reparative play is based on performance, specifically queer performance. It is an idealistic interpretation of a story that transpires and frames queer values. Through this queer performativity, members of the queer community have the chance to accurately represent ourselves and overwrite more harmful stereotypes that are associated with us. By formulating psychological problems and solutions for both the characters and the players, and showing how they fail or succeed in the actions they take, the enactment of particular values and behaviors can be experienced and rhetorically reinforced for the player. This frame of play creates a rhetorical discourse and can help the players reimagine the world in a positive light, changing how they view their positionality in and alongside the world's problems. So Electra Diacalambriano notes that reality is not objective, but socially constructed, and thus having narratives is our way of maintaining and organizing our personal reality and making sense of our experiences. In line with this rhetorical view of the world, reparative play constructs progressive narratives with the experiential reading it affords players through the performance. Role play is one such activity that has room for this queer performativity, and sometimes it can be found in theater, but more recently, and when I say more recently, like the last 50 years, it has been popularized in role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons being the most popular. And some people see Dungeons and Dragons as simply just a game, but I'm here today to say that it is so much more to so many people in ways that we can't even realize. So a question I keep coming across is why D&D? Because it's popular. That's the reason. It is downright the most popular tabletop role-playing game in the world. That is not up for debate. The numbers reinforce that. There are multi-million-dollar podcasts that exist, Dimension 20, Critical Role, Adventure Zone, that all respond with that. And the main point of reparative reading, as Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick saw it, is to carve out these spaces for queer discourse within pre-existing narratives. And just as D&D is a pre-existing game system, it is reparative play to create a queer character or a queer narrative within this game system that was not designed for queer performativity. D&D's popularity makes the game a unique space in which queer characters can be written into existence in a mainstream medium. And as someone from my university said, queer games are made inherently queer by the people that play them, not the system that they use. So we know this to be true because the rhetorical benefits of D&D have been reported on previously, even if the players did not realize that they were actually taking part in a form of reparative play. Taliesin Jaffe touches on reparative play with his bisexual, gender-fluid character Molly Mock Tealeaf on the D&D podcast Critical Role, saying how it allows him to play out a life that he had once considered for himself. Joan Moriarty, in her article, How My Role-Playing Game Character Showed Me I Could Be a Woman, discusses at length how tabletop role-playing games were crucial to her journey of self-discovery. In a similar vein, game designer Josephine Baird describes the alibi that D&D gave her to take part in her own gender performativity in high school, while Ali Beardsley's portrayal of their trans character, Peter Conlon, on the D&D podcast 20 explored the life of a person who had undergone gender affirmation surgery shortly before Ali Beardsley underwent their own. For these reparative play examples, the stories of these characters help to normalize the idea of queer characters for both the individual as well as the larger community through their identification. So while playing the game has potential for reparative play, it's not always a guarantee. There are horror stories online enough to give us an idea that things can go very wrong. But that is why we look to game designers and theorists and researchers who look into this sort of stuff. For one, Axiel Kasanov, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but they bring up the strategy of making room for more gender exploration and role play through the use of pronouns, creating a world where every character is referred to as they, or any character can be referred to as any pronoun, she, her, he, him, they, them, makes it so that the character is able to transcend the gender norms that they could be constricted by. Additionally, the players might seek to create characters that work well together and are willing to help each other out and help to meet each other's mental and socio-emotional needs. Kemper, Janaya Kemper et al. Goes into great detail with regards to how members of the marginalized communities steer for survival. And this is a very crucial part of navigating the game in a manner that does not bring up any disparaging or insensitive subject matter. Most of the time, the way that this works in tabletop role-playing games is the session zero. The session zero is a game before the game where everybody kind of gets together, talks about what they plan to experience, what they want to experience, what they are not okay with experiencing, and setting boundaries. It has become so commonplace that the D&D module, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, has a session zero as part of the actual rules for running a horror game safely. And it also helps to ensure the sustainability of the endeavor. When all else fails, if a character does need to, or a player is uncomfortable with the scenario, Monty Cook created the idea of the X card, where
John Stavropoulos came up with the idea of the X card.
Thank you. He created the idea of the X card, where X card can be put on the table and anyone at any point can touch it to alert the table to their discomfort. And the play would end. Now, Bowman takes a typological approach to this way of designing characters. While there are trillions of possible characters that one could create for the game of Dungeons and Dragons, there are 9 types that Bowman brings up. The one that I'm going to be talking about is specifically the doppelganger self. The doppelganger self is made to act and think like the player, as though the player were trying to were put in the scenario that the character finds itself in. This is a very common character to make for beginners because they have an easier time navigating the world when they're not preoccupied with the dissonance that comes between the character's wants and the player's wants. Bowman notes the similarity between the primary self and the persona can also work to enhance self-esteem, offering ordinary people the opportunity to do extraordinary things and make a difference in crisis situations. And that is how I created this beefy boy. This is Vander Adamson. He is all things masculine, except for the fact that he is asexual. There are probably a couple other facts that make him not so much masculine there, but that was the main one that I focused on for the purposes of creating a character for me. He, as the son of the giant god, he was responsible for marrying an heir from each divided kingdom in order to unite the giant race as a whole. And he couldn't do that properly, as was expected of him, because he did not find any of his partners sexually attractive. What he was able to do is he was able to make great friends with them, and that was more functional for me as an asexual person. And he helped me to create this asexual narrative in my head that was my own canon, at least, that helped me kind of self-identify as a member of the ace community. And the only other asexual character that I probably saw before this point was Todd Chavez from BoJack Horseman, but I wouldn't say that I exactly identify with him. Considering aspects of my identity this way aided in creating a character who was more attuned to the way that I felt about the world. Having this type of self-representation gave me much needed rhetorical support in light of modern day mainstream media that failed to assist me. My concluding thoughts on this topic is that reparative play is a very powerful rhetorical tool that can be used to the benefit of both the individual and their community through the active creation of queer narratives. So thank you for listening to my work. My email and socials can be found there if you want to get in contact with me. For those of you who are interested in seeing the media artifact that me and my dungeon master have been creating as a byproduct of reparative play, you can check it out at kayamore.com or scan the QR code. This is a D&D based comic that has been 7 years in the making with short stories, voice acting, and archived lore. You can get a pretty good idea of how D&D has been impacting the social online spaces from this. We also have a Patreon if you want to donate. It's not necessary, but we do want to kind of create a sustainable endeavor with this. Thank you for my parents for coming out to see me. And thank you for my girlfriend, Alexandra, who's watching home.